I mean, the first thing that comes to mind today for me as someone who, works in New York City and grew up here, was born in New York, is just um, everything that's going on with Eric Adams, our mayor, is just such a disgrace. I mean, I'm sure everyone has heard by now that pretty much there's a quid pro quo that's been going on between President Trump and Eric Adams. So, they made a deal that Eric Adams' criminal charges would be dismissed by the Justice Department in exchange for the mayor allowing Trump to just let ICE run rampant in New York City for the purposes of this whole mass deportation campaign. I mean, if that does not stink of corruption, and I can't think of a worse example. You know, as the mayor, he's supposed to protect the citizens of New York City, and even his public um, speeches about what would happen to New Yorkers who were afraid of being detained by ICE. He was always giving these inconsistent, vague, ambiguous messages. And I thought it was strange at the time, like, why is he not coming out and saying, New York is a sanctuary city and we are not going to let ICE just run all over the communities and pick up anybody that they felt like. And now it's completely clear why he's been kind of being very two-faced about it, right? He was his only concern about his own well-being, trying to avoid being convicted of the corruption that, the evidence is pretty strong to prove that he, um, in my opinion, is guilty of what he's accused of doing. Um, and it's just, I think, a really shameful time to see it so blatant, right? That this is what the current administration is doing, is it's forcing its way and trying to exert um, all of its, intimidation tactics to basically run rampant over people's rights. It's just like I still can't. It's really hard to believe that it's just so out in the open. It's not even being concealed. So that's what's at the top of my mind today. I also find that despite all of this kind of negative, just seeing like people's true colors come out, also um, what's keeping my faith in humanity is just kind of the reaction of um, the head of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York. She was pretty much given this ultimatum to dismiss the charges. And instead, she took a stand and she basically said, I'm ready to submit my resignation. I mean, this is someone who was 8.5 months pregnant. And for her to take a stand and also to have, fellow assistant U.S. attorneys in the Southern District of New York also deciding that this is just not something that they have the stomach to do. I mean, that kind of restores my faith a little bit. That I think it's times like this when we're seeing crisis after crisis that although it's horrible what's going on, it's really also putting a lot of people um, in this kind of moral, waking up moment, right? Like, I think now is the time for a lot of attorneys to really use the tools that we have. We've been trained for this for law school, and it's time for a lot of lawyers to really step up and take a stand against all of the, unlawful things that I think are going on right now under this administration. So that's one thing. What else is going on? I'm also encouraged to see that there's so many lawsuits being filed against the administration for all of the executive orders that have been announced. It's nice, to say the least, to see that a lot of the courts are granting injunctions, temporary restraining orders, and, resoundingly clapping back that a lot of these executive orders are just not justifiable. Um, The one lawsuit that I really have my eye focused on right now is the lawsuit that was filed by a few nonprofits and private plaintiffs suing the executive order that basically suspended the refugee resettlement program. And the reason why I have my eye on this is because pretty much a month ago, I filed a lawsuit, a mandamus case against the government for one of my clients who is already a green card holder, but he was initially granted asylum in the United States. That's how he is now a permanent resident. But basically, his family is abroad and they've been separated for more than 5 years now. And he filed a petition to bring his family over with USCIS. But that petition has been pending for more than 5 years. At this point, it's been 5.5 years. There's no rhyme or reason why his case is taking so long. On average, these petitions, which are called 730s, are, according to immigration's website, taking about 10, 11 months, right? So why is my client's case taking 6 times longer than the average? Right after he filed the petition, the only thing that immigration has done is just issued a receipt notice. That's it. They have not said one way or the other whether they have reviewed it at all. Is it assigned to an officer? Nobody knows. It just fell into this black hole. So that's why we decided to finally sue the government. You know, he called, emailed, and, basically submitted inquiries to USCIS. Through his previous lawyer, they also requested an expedite from immigration, saying the danger that his family faced because they're still stuck abroad in the home country that he sought protection from. And the expedite request was never acknowledged by immigration. So this is the last step, right? Mandamus, the lawsuit. This is oftentimes the only recourse that many clients have because all previous efforts and due diligence have basically been fruitless. So I thought it was really interesting that right after I filed the mandamus, that this executive order comes out saying halt all refugee resettlement and just, no more funding for this program. Initially, I was really worried, that this executive order meant that the government could then say, well, too bad, we can't process this petition because Trump says that no more refugees into the United States. So I'm really hopeful that this lawsuit will essentially get this executive order reversed. There's also a backup argument. There's a legal argument that I'm thinking in the back of my head that the way the executive order was written, it applies to quote unquote refugees. Well, my client was not a refugee. He was an applicant for asylum, and immigration approved this asylum application. And there is a slight difference between asylees and refugees. That difference being that if someone is already physically in the United States, then they would apply for asylum, whereas refugees are processed from abroad. They're not already here physically. So that is a technicality. That is a difference that on the face of it, if the government were to oppose the writ of mandamus by saying that the executive order applies, then my counter argument would be, well, my client is not a refugee, so he and his family are not subject to this executive order. So to be continued, we shall see. I'm hoping that this lawsuit will fall into the hands of a fair and reasonable district court judge who will then enjoin or make some ruling saying that this executive order cannot stand.